There was a time when the InterCity 125 was the fastest diesel train on Earth, then quietly set aside. Not because it failed, but because the world changed. Built as a temporary fix for a struggling railway, it went on to define British travel for over 40 years. It wasn't elegant, it was powerful, loud, and reliable. In the 1970s, as railways declined and cars took over, Britain couldn't afford a modern electric future. So it built something unexpected, a machine that didn't just survive, but thrived. This is the story of the train that saved the railway, and why it disappeared. To understand how something so successful could disappear, we have to go back to the beginning, because the story of the InterCity 125 doesn't start with success, but with a railway already in decline. By the early 1970s, Britain's railways were no longer symbols of Victorian progress or post-war ambition. Instead, they had become painful reminders of a fading past. The glamour of the steam age was long gone, replaced by a gritty, underfunded reality. Services were slow, the rolling stock was aging and grey, and public confidence was slipping away year by year. The social fabric of Britain was changing rapidly. The motor car, once a luxury for the few, was now a household necessity for the many. The new motorway networks were slashing travel times between cities, and domestic air travel was beginning to expand. The railway, once the very backbone of the British Empire, was beginning to feel out of step with modern life. It was seen as dirty, late, and increasingly irrelevant. At the centre of this storm was British Rail, an organisation under immense pressure. Budgets were being slashed, and the beaching cuts of the previous decade had already torn limbs off the network, leaving small towns isolated and the main lines struggling to justify their existence. Expectations were rising, yet the infrastructure was crumbling. While the rest of Europe was looking toward high-speed electric futures, Britain was stuck with a legacy system that felt like it was running out of steam. This was more than just a technical or financial issue, it was a question of identity. What role did the railway play in a changing Britain? Was it still a vital part of everyday life, or was it becoming a relic of the past? If something didn't change, and change fast, the British Railway risked being left behind entirely, a ghost of the Industrial Revolution. But the solution was anything but simple. The obvious answer to the crisis was electrification. It was cleaner, faster, and undeniably the future. But in 1970s Britain, the obvious was often the unachievable. The cost of electrifying thousands of miles of track was astronomical, and the country's economy was in a state of flux. Britain didn't have decades to rebuild its tracks. It needed a solution that could work on the railway it already had. In this atmosphere of desperation, British Rail's engineers began to consider a radical, unconventional approach. They were already working on the advanced passenger train, a tilting miracle of technology that promised high speeds on curved tracks. But the apt was complex, expensive, and riddled with technical delays. They needed a stopgap, something to keep the passengers interested while the apt was perfected. So, the engineers asked a daring question. What if high speed could be achieved without electrification and without complex tilting mechanisms? What if they could push the limits of diesel technology further than anyone had ever dared? It was a bold gamble. Diesel trains were the workhorses of the network, dependable, but hardly revolutionary. They were synonymous with the trudge of daily travel, not the thrill of high speed. Yet, the concept of the HST, Hartrell, was born from a simple but ambitious idea: create a lightweight, high-powered train capable of sustained speeds of 125 miles per hour on existing, non-electrified tracks. No need for decades of infrastructure upgrades. No need for enormous upfront investment. Just a train that could transform performance almost overnight. To many, it seemed like a compromise, a temporary fix. But sometimes, the most unexpected ideas born from necessity are the ones that redefine history. When the InterCity 125 finally entered service in 1976, it didn't take long for the skeptics to be silenced. What had once been planned as a temporary stopgap quickly proved to be the most significant leap forward in the history of British travel. For the average passenger, the change was jarringly positive. Journeys that once felt like an endurance test became faster and smoother. The InterCity brand became synonymous with a premium experience. You weren't just taking the train, you were traveling on the 125. It brought a sense of confidence back to the platforms, a quiet assurance that Britain could still build world-class machinery. The design was as much a part of the success as the engine. Sir Kenneth Grange, one of Britain's most famous industrial designers, was brought in to style the train. He famously insisted on the wedge-shaped nose cone, removing the buffers to create a sleek, aerodynamic silhouette that looked like it belonged in the 21st century. It was a visual revolution. And then there was the speed. At 125 miles per hour, it became the fastest diesel train in the world. This wasn't just a technical stat. It was a point of national pride. It proved that British engineering could still innovate and set global standards. Under the operation of British Rail, the 125 became the backbone of the Great Western and East Coast main lines, restoring faith in a system that had been in terminal decline. To understand why the InterCity 125 became so respected, you have to look beyond the speed and into the engineering philosophy that made it possible. At its core, the 125 was built on the principle of balanced simplicity. The train consisted of two power cars, one at each end, providing balanced traction. This push-pull configuration meant that the train never had to be turned around at a terminus, saving precious time. In between these power cars were the Mark III coaches, widely regarded by enthusiasts and engineers alike as the finest railway carriages ever built. They were stable, exceptionally quiet, and featured slam doors that gave a satisfying, solid thud, a sound that every British traveller of a certain age remembers. This simplicity translated directly into reliability. While other high-tech systems around the world often struggled with complications, the 125 just worked. It could handle 400-mile journeys, day after day, in the freezing rain of the Scottish Highlands or the summer heat of the southwest, without losing its composure. It was also a masterpiece of adaptability. Over the next 40 years, the 125 was modernized multiple times. It evolved, not by reinventing itself, but by refining what already worked. It didn't chase trends, it quietly set the standard. But even the most reliable standards must eventually face a world they weren't designed for. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, the world that had made the InterCity 125 a hero was beginning to shift. The train was still performing brilliantly, still the fastest diesel on the planet, but the very definition of modernity was being rewritten around it. Across Europe, the TGV in France and the ICE in Germany were showing what was possible with dedicated high-speed electrified lines. Electrification was no longer an expensive dream, it was becoming a practical, sustainable necessity. Electric trains offered faster acceleration, lower maintenance costs, and zero emissions at the point of use. At the same time, passenger expectations were shifting. The slam doors that were once a sign of mechanical strength were now seen as a safety hazard and a massive accessibility barrier. People wanted air-conditioned environments that were quieter and more digitally integrated. The 125, for all its brilliance, was starting to show its age. It represented the old British rail, a world of diesel smoke and manual handles, while the new privatised railway was looking toward a digital, electric future. The disappearance of the InterCity 125 was not a sudden collapse. It was a slow, dignified retreat. As electrification finally reached the Great Western and East Coast main lines in the 21st century, the 125 was gradually pushed to the edges of the network. The introduction of the Hitachi Azuma and other modern bimode trains marked the final chapter. These new trains could run on electric wires where they existed and diesel engines where they didn't. They were the new solution to the old British problem of partial electrification. The retirement was accelerated by legislation. New laws regarding disability access and emissions meant that the 125 would require millions of pounds in upgrades to stay legal. For many operators, it was simply easier to buy new. And so, one by one, the racehorses of the rail were taken out of service. The 125 didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because the very world it saved had finally outgrown it. In engineering, as in life, eras must eventually change. To understand the loss, you have to understand what it felt like to be on one. There was a tactility to the opening the window to reach out and pull the exterior handle of a slam door. The smell of the diesel exhaust mixed with the morning fog of the Pennines. The way the carriage leaned into a curve at 100 miles per hour, feeling heavy and secure. Modern trains are better. They are cleaner, they are more accessible, and they are undeniably more efficient. But they are also sterile. They lack the theatre of the 125. When a Class 43 power car roared into life, it was a performance. It was a machine that you could hear, smell, and feel. For the British public, the 125 wasn't just a way to get from A to B, it was a companion on the journey. Remarkably, the story doesn't end with a scrapyard. While the Hest has vanished from the premier London routes, it has found a surprising second life. In Scotland, the shortened InterCity 125 sets still run under the InterCity service, connecting cities like Aberdeen and Inverness. Even today, they continue to handle long, non-electrified routes with surprising strength. Elsewhere, retired Hest power cars have been exported to countries like Mexico and Nigeria, where they are still used as practical high-speed solutions. What was once meant to be a temporary stopgap has become a lasting global asset. But in Britain, its era is fading. The 125 is no longer the backbone of the network, it is history. Yet its legacy remains clear. It bridged the gap between an aging post-war railway and the modern high-speed system that followed. The InterCity 125 was never just a train. It defined an era of British travel, built out of necessity, perfected through simplicity, and remembered for its power and reliability. It didn't fail, it simply belonged to a time that has passed. And as its final services fade into memory, so does the sound that once defined an entire nation.